Now, the Office of the Family Advocate has been inundated with cases of parents who either neglected their parental responsibilities, violated custody agreements, and in some extreme cases, kidnapped their own children. Now, some of the cases the office had to deal with were parents who violated lockdown regulations by moving children around despite not getting a court order authorizing exactly that. During the lockdown, there was also a lot of confusion around child custody and parental rights, and this remained a difficulty, especially because the courts were closed. So as we move to level 2 of the regulations, what services are now available to the parents who have had these experiences? For more, we're joined now by South Africa's Chief Family Advocate, Petunia Seabi-Mathope. Good morning, Advocate. Thanks very much for your time on the AM report. Before we get into exactly what level 2 of the lockdown means for the parents that have been affected in one way or another, give us a sense again of some of the big cases that you've heard of, that you've been told about, involving parents and who are not living together, who are sharing perhaps custody of their children, and how they've been able to navigate this 5-month lockdown period.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Maybe just by way of background, the parents that are most affected by the travel restrictions that followed the declaration of the lockdown are divorced parents or separated parents or parents that were never married or living apart for whatever reason. Then the arrangement is that you'll find one parent being the primary caretaker and then the other parent exercising contact with the child. Now, with the travel restriction, one of the conditions was that no traveling across provincial borders was allowed. Now, children that were, and you remember it started in March when we were sitting on the back of school holidays or already into school holidays in other instances. Then children were stuck either during a visitation with the one parent, or children could not go for a visitation to the other parent when the school shut down. Yes. The schools shut down under abnormal circumstances, and parents started going into major conflict in determining whether the lockdown constituted a school holiday or not. Then, we saw quite a number of urgent applications coming into the various high courts. But the one leading case was where both divorced parents went to court as co-applicants, because at the time their child was stuck in another province whilst they were stuck in a different province together but living separately. The child was visiting a grandparent in the other province, and they could not travel back because of the lockdown. The grandmother is quite of advanced age, could not continue taking care of the child for prolonged periods of time. Then the parents got very desperate for the child to return to them. Then they approached the court for relief, and very many other similar things. But what really was concerning with regards to the travel restrictions was the frustration in children. Children thrive on predictability and stability. Now, this lockdown came down. Nobody knew what it was. Parents struggled to the best of their ability to explain it to the children, but children felt uprooted. Children felt the disruption into their normal routine. The younger ones could not understand why they are not seeing the other parent. And, the even smaller ones, estrangement set in because of the shortness of their memory span. So, it brought on a lot of turmoil in terms of arrangements with in relation to parental contact. But we are very happy now that interprovincial travel is now permitted. Parents will be able to go back to a more settled arrangement in terms of their parenting plans or parental rights and responsibility agreements or even court orders.
Yeah.
Or, some parents have got out of court settlements. That's another thing. The regulations did not cater for those parents that did not have a court order or a parenting plan. Parents that fell outside these categories didn't know what to do with their children and mostly resorted to escalated conflict, and the children became when two elephants fight, as they say, it's the ground that suffers. The children suffered the most because contact became disrupted and so on and so on.
So, Advocate, I know that the family advocates officers were dealing with some of these challenges in some ways telephonically. I understand that mediation was also taking place on some online platforms as well. But of course, we know that this is not possible for every single family to have access to the infrastructure that would allow for online mediation.
Absolutely. You can imagine parents that are indigent, that do not have access to data or cannot afford the cost of data, people who are sitting in areas where there is no network coverage. Even for our professionals that tried to reach them, it was difficult because, those facilities were not available. During the lockdown, we tried to minimize the conflicts by coming up with all manner of innovative recommendations for the parents. But, to some parents, it was just not possible to function under those conditions. So those children were also, exposed to a bit of emotional turmoil.
So now leading up to level two of the lockdown is now officially in place. Does it mean that the Family Advocate's Office is now having to deal with a backlog of cases from the last 5 months of the lockdown?
Yes, we are sitting with quite a bit of a backlog because remember in March how the lockdown came in. We had already scheduled appointments which we had to cancel, then put in place the arrangements for the offices to become habitable under the circumstances, and then start calling in clients for consultation. But still, with the social distancing requirements, we could not have our full complement of staff attending to these matters. Added to that was the fact that the courts also were placing far lesser cases on the roll. So we were getting fewer referrals from the courts for our intervention.
Looking back now, Advocate, sorry to come in there, looking back on how we've conducted the past 5 months of the lockdown, particularly as it relates to children who are living with parents who are not living together or divorced or separated, whatever the case might be, how could we have done the past 5 months of the lockdown better, just given, as you say, the extensive impact that this kind of uncertainty does have on our children?
Our country has got some of the most beautiful laws in our statute books. We have signed up for the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. We are a member of the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child. We also have our own Children's Act, whose Section 10 says the voice of the child should be heard. Our Constitution says, Section 28(2), the best interest of the child must be afforded paramountcy in every matter that affected the child. But, we find ourselves tripping up on most occasions that we make decisions and not having heard the child or the voice of the child. Now, the regulations came in, they were urgent, they were necessary. A balance had to be found between saving lives and the rights of people. But children were left outside. if you look at our first batch of regulations and the rest that came in thereafter, you see that, in the first batch, we missed out on the child. In the second batch, we started saying children that are covered by parenting plans and court orders, but still excluded the majority of the children. It is a tough situation to manage for the country, but we really need to be true to what we say in the statute books we want to do. We want to hear the voice of the child. The voice of the child is important. We have accepted international standards through the two instruments that I have referred to, which says we must always hear the voice of the child. So we need to go back to the drawing board and, for future reference, see how best we realize the voice of the child in decisions that we make.
Yeah, what an incredibly tough time it's been for many, many families around the country. Advocate, thanks very much for your time. Advocate Petunia Seabi-Mathope is South Africa's chief family advocate, as we just take a closer look at how the lockdown has affected many families around the country.